all through the plays of the Irish Times about Katie Roach, one seems to see an almost imperceptible change in the ordinary values of life. By far the most compelling characters in Deevy's work, and I think the character of Nan Bowers in the play that's on this afternoon, The Wife of James Whelan, is one of these, are these characters for whom we have a hint, an intimation of a very active inner life, an inner life that is slightly different from what we'd expect. But we never quite connect with that. We can't quite put our finger on what it is, and neither can the other characters in the play. There are these enigmatic, subjective states going on in the characters' minds. One of the plays that really made it clear to me that this is what's going on in Deevy's work is a later radio play called In the Cellar of My Friend. Now, this play only exists in a manuscript copy in the National Library of Ireland, so very few people have read it. But the play this time centers on a male character who, once again, is inscrutable, is unreadable to the other characters around him, including the female character who wants to marry him, until finally, at the end of the play, he announces he's going to become a monk, take up religious orders. And one of the characters in the play, a servant in the play, says this, and I think in some ways it sums up to me what Teresa Deevy's work is all about. The character says this: "It do seem to me there is no two people can to the full comprehend one another." Not fully, not as I sees it. In the way she writes comprehend, she actually writes it hyphenated. COM-PRE-HEND. Comprehend. No two people can to the full comprehend one another. There, I think, puts the finger on what is going on in Teresa Deevy's work. In our ordinary lives, we all do what I'm doing here, what we're doing here. We communicate. We try to communicate with one another. But we're always aware that the person that we're talking with, there's some part of them that is always hidden from us, that is always slightly obscured. I think what brings us back to the theater time and time again, why would people spend a lovely August afternoon in a dark room, is to be in the presence of these other people, these other consciousnesses, these other minds. And yet all the time we're aware that that consciousness that's up here on the stage, that other person, we can reach out to them, but we can never fully know everything about that person. We can never fully plumb that consciousness. I think Deevy is acutely aware of this, and I think in some ways it might be related to her hearing impairment. Because for Deevy, language was a fallible medium. That when going through her letters and you look at the way she talks about communicating with people, she's lip reading, she's writing, she has her sister Nell translating things for her, that language isn't something she can take for granted. She can't take it for granted that when she's communicating with somebody that there's a steady flow back and forth. That there's always this sense that people are there, we can communicate, but we never quite know what's going on in their minds. One way to think about that kind of awareness, that kind of hyper-awareness of language and the unknowability of other people, is to think it's a bit like walking. We all do it, but when you think about it, balance on one foot, put it in front of the other one, balance on the other foot, put it in front of the other one, you think it's a strange activity, yeah. Language, talking to other people is like that. When you think about how complex language is and how fallible it is as the way in which we communicate with other people, it's astonishing that we do it at all. I think Teresa Deevy was somebody for whom, walking was almost falling all the time in that metaphorical sense. That she's aware of this glass wall, if you like, between people. A couple of weeks ago, you may have seen that there was an article in the New York Times about the play that's on this afternoon, Wife James Whelan, and the journalist asked me what I thought about Deevy's work. And I said, in some ways, it's astonishingly modern. That it almost reminds me, in a funny sort of way, almost of something like Pinter. Because there's this sense that language doesn't quite sit in the world, that it doesn't quite do what we want it to do, that we're in the presence of other people, but they're somehow just behind a wall of glass. For that reason, I find that Deevy's work, for me, connects not so much with an earlier generation of Irish playwrights, Yeats, Synge, Lady Gregory, but with later ones, particularly, say, somebody like Brian Friel. I don't know if you know his play Philadelphia, Here I Come. It's been staged in New York a number of occasions. Friel is dealing with exactly the same kinds of issues. There's a play in Philadelphia, Here I Come. He uses a situation very much like the kind of situation Deevy uses in Wife to James Whelan. Small town in rural Ireland. We have a young man who is on the last night before he emigrates from the small town in Donegal to go to Philadelphia. You would think he would want to talk to his father. You would think a son would want to have, because in those days emigrating wasn't a case of getting on the plane, it was getting on the boat, and it was a long way you went for life. You would think they would have things to say to one another, father to son, son to father. But he can't. He can't talk to his father. So what Friel does is dramatizes this by having two actors play this young man, Gar. There's public Gar, who's a young man who's, finds it quite difficult to talk. And then there's this private Gar, who is very athletic, full of energy, very articulate, constantly singing, dancing, leaping around the stage. And it's the inner life of the character. So what Friel does is stages that inner life. I think with Deevy, you get a sense of this inner life live on the stage as a character, but we don't see that character. There's a wonderfully moving moment in Philadelphia, Here I Come, where the private Gar tries to think what sums up his relationship with his father. And he remembers an afternoon fishing on a lake in a blue boat. In a blue boat on a lake on an afternoon in May, and on that afternoon a great beauty happened. A beauty that has haunted the boy ever since, because he wonders now, did it take place or did he imagine it? And so the public Gar asks his father, do you remember that afternoon on the lake with the blue boat? The father says, a blue one, eh? No, I remember a brown one. And so this memory that for the boy, or for Gar, is sums up his relationship to his father. His father can't even remember. And he doesn't know, did he imagine it or not? And it's that sense of the gap, of the unknowability of other people, that I think Friel stages so well. And a lot of his work ever since has been about that gap, that glass wall between people. I think Deevy got there first. That in some ways, her work is very much like the work of somebody like Brian Friel. So in lots of ways then, Wife to James Whelan is a play from the outside. When she finished writing it in 1942, or 1942 at the latest, she, as I said, she had fallen out of favor with the Abbey. It was broadcast on radio, it was broadcast on the BBC in 1946, and on Irish radio in 1947. And then it sat on a shelf until 1956, when a group of semi-professional actors staged it in a small little basement studio theatre, Madame Cogley's Studio Theatre in Dublin. It only ran for about a week. And from that time to this, the play, as far as I or anyone else can find, has never been staged by a professional company. So what's going to happen here on this stage this afternoon, what's been happening over the last week, is that I think Jonathan and his team here at the Mint have taken this play that has been on the outside, as it were, and they finally brought it inside. And I think that is a real accomplishment. That is something we should applaud. And it's not something we see every day happening in the theatre. This kind of retrieval of a voice that in so many different ways was on the outside.